Hi, I'm Simon K. Jones, and this is the audio version of my newsletter, which you can find at simonkjones.substack.com. And this is all about, is Deckle a Scrivener replacement? Now, Bettridge's law of headlines states, any headline that ends in a question mark can be answered by the word no. When journalists and reviewers frame a title as a question, it intrinsically suggests the presence of significant doubt. Otherwise, they'd simply state it as fact. So is Deckle a Scrivener replacement? No, not yet. At this point, I imagine the more pressing question is, what the heck is a Deckle? So before we begin, just some disclaimery stuff here. Deckle kindly provided me with early access to their software. During this period, I've been in frequent contact with them, asking questions and making annoying feature suggestions. Several of my requests have already been added as features, which is nice. They've got an affiliate program, which means you can get 10% off Deckle when using the code WRITEMORE, as one word, with your purchase directly then supporting this newsletter as well. All that said, everything you're about to hear me gibber on about are my thoughts alone. They haven't seen any of this article prior to me publishing it, etc. But it's up to you whether you want to believe me or not. So hopefully that lays out where we're at. So, what is Deckle? I'm always on alert for interesting writing tools. This year I've been collecting the names of software and services to check out. Lacuna, ScriptTry, Atticus, Readsy Studio, Open Atelier, Affinity. And I'll probably write about each of them on the newsletter at some point. Deckle was not on my radar until early June, when the developer got in touch asking if I was interested in taking a look. Listener, I was. For some context, I've been a Scrivener user since probably about 2012, I think. It's what I've used for all 4 of my major serials, and I've written about how I don't think I could write and publish in the way I do without it. I've got a separate video all about my Tales from the Triverse project file in Scrivener, so do go and check that out on the newsletter. So I evangelise about Scrivener whenever I get the chance. That said, it is notorious for 2 things. 1, a very steep learning curve for new users, and 2, a compile/export interface that is confusing. It manages to be both highly complex yet also somehow underpowered at the same time. It's why I turned to Readsy Studio back in 2024, when I produced the ebook and paperback of No Adults Allowed. The idea of doing it in Scrivener didn't really compute. Readsy makes everything easy, but is extremely restrictive. I've also designed a cover and interior for a client using Affinity Studio, which is at the opposite end of the spectrum, in terms of power and difficulty. Along comes Deckle, which claims to do all the important Scrivener bits and have the easy export of something like Readsy, and retain the design flexibility to make it your own. It's currently in early access before moving to version 1 in early August, and I've been testing it out for the last few weeks. There's a lot of promise here. So the fundamentals then. It's a $197 one-off purchase, or $107 until August 8th. So if you buy it in the early access period, it's a bit cheaper, but obviously early access software, not fully tested, etc., etc., at your own risk and all that. It's a local install. It's not a cloud-based thing. The license covers installation on 2 separate devices, and it's available on Mac, Windows, and Linux. At the top then, we have a very solid license model. There's no Adobe-style subscription bullshit. It's a single purchase, and you're sorted. This isn't a web-based app that disappears when you don't have access to the internet. Your project files remain on storage devices that you own, rather than a third party's magical cloud. And it's not inexplicably Mac only, like Vellum. That Deckle is available on the 3 main computer systems is convenient and unusual. It's also increasingly critical, rather than being a simple personal preference. I've spent much of 2026 researching how to extricate myself from certain large corporations based in countries which unfortunately aren't as friendly to the UK as they used to be, and Scrivener was one of the last programs keeping me tied to Windows. So is Deckle any good? Lots of programs claim to do X, Y, and Z without quite meeting expectations. Deckle is currently, as I write this, in early access and has been rapidly evolving even while I've been testing it. I'm recording this on the 18th of July, and there have been 2 significant updates in as many days. A month or 2 from now, it could be different again. That's why this is very much first impressions rather than any kind of substantive review. So I've got a bunch of screenshots over in the newsletter version of this, which you can find at simonkjones.substack.com. So if you want to see what Deckle actually looks like, do pop over there while you listen. And that's where you'll see a screenshot showing the first chapter of my book, No Adults Allowed, inside of Deckle. Elements of the layout will seem familiar to Scrivener users, with the binder on the left showing the chapters and the editor in the middle. The big shift from Scrivener is that you then have a preview pane on the right. This is a live, updating view of what your exported book will look like, complete with your chosen styles. It means you always know what to expect, rather than waiting until a compile is finished, only to discover that something's in the wrong place. You can hide it all away and customize your interface, of course, if you just want to focus on the writing. There's even a focus mode that strips everything away except for the words. Chapters also have metadata properties that you can use in whatever way makes sense. Structurally, a book can be comprised of parts, chapters, and scenes, as you'd expect, and you can deploy folders to keep things tidy. As well as the manuscript draft, there's also a research section where you can keep your notes. One thing to note is that everything you're seeing in the screenshots, if you're looking at the screenshots, was imported from my Scrivener project file. Deckle can import files from most of the common word processors, and having my entire project arrive intact, manuscript and research, was a pretty big deal. It makes the switching cost very low. You can split the editor for a dual view and switch to outliner or continuous modes. Deckle is never as feature-rich as Scrivener, but that also means it's never as complicated. Something I've always appreciated about Google's Office suite is that they focused on the Microsoft Office features you actually use day to day, made them much easier to use, and then dumped the rest. Now, if you're a power user, that can be limiting, but for 80% of users, it's a good experience, and Deckle seems to be taking that same approach. There's a bunch of useful settings like auto-updates and the ability to quickly change the interface style. You can go for like a dark mode or light mode depending on your preference or time of day and what have you. If you read my article about Reedsy Studio, you remember I covered the fact that they've got all these crazy, way overly detailed templates for logging like bits of armor and a mug and costumes, and it's completely crazy. But if that's your sort of thing, you'll find them in Deckle's Codex section where you can keep track of characters, locations, and items. Okay, so sounds like a simple version of Scrivener so far. That's kind of what I've been describing, a streamlined version of Scrivener. If you've always liked the idea of Scrivener but have found it too tricky to tackle, that might be enough to give Deckle a look. Even if you're a veteran Scrivener user, there are all sorts of quality of life bonuses here too. Super fast loading and saving for a start. My large serials can take several minutes to load and save in Scrivener, but here it's just instant. There's a modern responsive interface, those nifty UI stylings that I was talking about. But we haven't got to the main event yet, which is the export and the styles. Because when you go into here, you see a whole bunch of presets you can pick from. Each time you pick a preset, the preview of what your book looks like changes with new fonts and positioning and layouts. Clicking a style updates the preview and you can move through pages to see how the text flows, all while still working on your manuscript if you want. There are more presets in Deckle than in something like Reedsy Studio. I haven't delved into the presets in great detail yet, so I can't speak to how good they are in terms of the output, but at first glance they seem pretty decent. It's a nice lineup. If it was just limited to presets, that would still be a pretty decent situation for what Deckle's doing. But you can also dive into the advanced settings where you can fiddle around with typography and chapter design and fonts and paragraphs and scene breaks and all sorts. You get a lot of granular detail, which means you can make the output whatever you need it to be, putting your personal stamp on it. Again, I need to dig into these in more detail and test it out in anger, but it looks very promising. The styles are separate to the text of your manuscript, so you're never locked into decisions made during writing. Once you're ready, you can then export, and you can produce an EPUB file for digital distribution, a PDF for print on demand, or a docx Word file to send to your agent or publisher or an editor or wherever you need. It all seems pretty comprehensive. So, what's the catch? Deckle is the first time in over a decade that something has caught my eye which offered an alternative to Scrivener. the ease of importing my projects, the speed and simplicity of the interface, and of course the combination of power and effortlessness in the export, all deeply appealing. I'm not switching right now though. Deckle is still in early access, although it's scheduled for its V1 release on 8th of August. I'm looking forward to that, but I'm also aware that this is very new software. Scrivener is old and often clunky, but it's also tried and tested. I trust Scrivener not to mess up my projects, and that's worth a lot. Thousands of people have used Scrivener for years, which means it's a solid tool that's been used in the factory without breaking. Deckle has none of that heritage, yet. I would be nervous to move my next big serial project into it, for example. As a professional writer, I can't risk a project imploding halfway through. I mean, that's why I don't use Microsoft Word. I'm not saying that would happen with Deckle, but it's thus far unproven. I don't know anything about the devs, who they are, what they've done before, and so on. My plan, then, is to use Deckle to create a new ebook and paperback of No Adults Allowed. That book is currently languishing in the Amazonian dungeon, and I'm desperate to get it out of there and more widely available at actually decent bookshops. It's the perfect test case for Deckle, a pre-existing project which I can import and style appropriately, then export out for distribution. It'll be a real-world test that will tell me a lot more than the last month of poking and prodding around the edges. That's when I'll be able to properly answer the question posed at the top of this piece. If you want to jump on board and have a look yourself, remember you can use the code WRITEMORE, no space, just all as one word, at the checkout to get 10% off. Doing so also helps support this newsletter. But I will probably report back later in the year once I've used it to try and do this No Adults Allowed experiment, so you might want to wait till then as well. Anyway, I hope that was useful. I think Deckle's a really interesting proposition, and hopefully it will turn out to be something cool. Thanks for listening, and head over to simonkjones.substack.com if you want to leave comments and thoughts.